Welcome to Whatsoever More or Less, a channel where citizens diligently study the U.S. Constitution for ourselves, seeking to understand it in the tradition of our founders. Occasionally, references will come from the leaders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as our doctrine contains a divine mandate to defend the U.S. Constitution. Okay, today we're going over the lawmaking process, Article 1, Section 7, and I'm surprised. Stay tuned for Article 1, Section 7, Clause 3 as that comes up. It was something that I found to be way more interesting than I thought it would be. But right now let's cover the part that all of us are taught in high school, basically. Article 1, Section 7, Clause 2. Every bill which shall have passed the House of Representatives and the Senate shall, before it become a law, be presented to the President of the United States. If he approve, he shall sign it. But if not, he shall return it with his objections to that House in which it shall have originated, who shall enter the objections at large on their journal and proceed to reconsider it. If after such reconsideration 2/3 of that House shall agree to pass the bill, it shall be sent together with the objections to the other House, by which it shall likewise be reconsidered. And if approved by 2/3 of that House, it shall become a law. But in all cases the votes of both houses shall be determined by yeas and nays. The names of the persons voting for and against the bill shall be entered on the journal of each House respectively. If any bill shall not be returned by the President within 10 days, Sundays excepted, after it shall have been presented to him, the same shall be a law, in like manner as if he had signed it, unless the Congress by their adjournment prevent its return, in which case it shall not be a law. Okay, so this is what we learned when we were in high school. I think everybody still gets taught this much. Not that we get taught a whole lot about the Constitution, but I think this is one aspect that all of us are consistently taught. And so I'll go ahead and skip the commentary mostly, except for it's interesting that the president has to sign it. I think the founders intentionally planned that. They wanted the executive to be involved in making sure the bill was passed or not passed, as just that one more check to make sure that it was really had gone through a sufficient consideration. And if he still rejected it and then the 2/3 passed it anyhow on both houses, it became a law anyhow. The founders were really smart about ratios. They didn't want pure democracy. So I would say always pay attention to ratios in the Constitution. Do they want 2/3 here? Do they want 3/4 here? Is it a simple majority vote but with the signature of the president? Is it, pay attention to each little thing. And so I find it actually quite impressive how they tried to temper democracy. Okay, moving on here. Quick reference to the powers that may be exercised with the Article 1, Section 7, Clause 2 process. Okay, so Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 1 and 18. Article 1, Section 8, first off, I was recently listening to Walter Williams. He's a famous commentator, kind of originalist type commentator, economists like Thomas Sowell and others, who said, when he talked about the Constitution, he's like, I really know Article 1, Section 8. That's the part to really know. Most of us will agree. There's more to it than just that, but you'll constantly hear Rand Paul, Ron Paul, all sorts of people just build name off Article 1, Section 8. So tip for anybody wanting to get to know the Constitution, study Article 1, Section 8. So quick breakdown now here. Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 1 and 18 serve as bookends to the powers listed in Clauses 2 through 17. Clause 1 empowers the Congress to have a budget to carry out their powers. Okay, so they can't do anything if they don't have a budget. So that's bookend on the front end. Okay, and then Clause 18 on the back end empowers Congress to identify actions necessary to exercising their enumerated powers that, if not allowed, would make the exercise of the enumerated powers basically impossible. So these are called incidental powers, is what those are called. It requires that Congress must identify that the additional power must be both necessary to the foregoing powers and proper to the Constitution itself. If it is both necessary and proper to the foregoing powers, it is permitted, right? So say, for example, there's a power to build post roads, okay? And in order to build that post road, they need to cut down a tree to make room for the road to actually exist, right? They don't have to have the power enumerated to cut down a tree. That's a necessary and proper one. And Okay, moving on here. Clauses 2 through 9. If you read Article 1, Section 8, by the way, it says the only purposes for which the tax dollars can be used are, or the revenue, whatever you want to call it, is general welfare and common defense. Okay, that's it. And so if you read clauses 2 through 9, 2 through 9 are the powers that promote the general welfare referred to in clause 1. And then if you read clauses 10 through 17, they're the powers that provide for the common defense referred to in clause 1. Okay, so that's why we call those the bookends. Okay, and 1 and 18 are the bookends. 2 through 17 are the powers granted. Okay, and then the main powers, the body of the main powers, the functional powers. Okay, additional and implied congressional powers found in other sections, right? Additional powers that would be exercised, in other words, through this process that we just covered in the previous slide. Okay, would be Article 1, Section 4 regarding elections. Okay. Article 1, Section 9, Clauses 1 and 2 regarding immigration and habeas corpus. So Section 9 is usually seen as the prohibitions to the federal government or to Congress. However, Article 1, Section 9, Clauses 1 and 2 are prohibitions with exceptions. Okay. So those exceptions then would obviously be implied powers. Okay. And that's regarding immigration and habeas corpus. Then Article 2, Section 1, Clause 4 regarding elections. Okay, presidential elections, obviously. And then Article 3, Section 2, Clause 2 regarding limiting judicial jurisdiction. So believe it or not, judicial jurisdiction isn't endless. Even though it might seem like that. Oh, the Supreme Court's going to decide this, the Supreme Court's going to decide that. We'll get into that, but we'll get into a quote about autocratic ambitions real soon here, and I'll probably bring that up again as a matter of fact. And then in Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2 regarding temporary control, then disposition of lands not used for Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 purposes. So this is important to understand that the Louisiana Purchase being a great example. A lot of times people call that unconstitutional. I've already covered that. It is not unconstitutional. They did have the power to temporarily control and then dispose of the lands unless those lands were being used for legitimate Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 purposes. And we'll get into that in another presentation more detailed. So moving on here. Article 1, Section 7, Clause 1. And I know I'm doing this out of order. I covered Clause 2 first, the bill-making process. But now let's talk about this. All bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House of Representatives, but the Senate may propose or concur with amendments as on other bills. Now, the founders, you have to think, you guys, why would this be the first clause? Were they super excited about being taxed without representation? That's one of our general stories we've been told about why the revolution happened, and it's a valid story. Of course, they were paranoid about taxes. They wanted to make sure. So there's constant clarification. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 says, the only reason you can spend these tax dollars is for common defense and general welfare. And we're going to enumerate those powers, right? We're not going to just blow your money, right? And once again, they're putting the power in the most popular house. We've done in a previous presentation how many representatives there are versus how many senators. Okay, there's far more representatives. They're the most closely connected to the people. And Madison said the power over the purse may in fact be regarded as the most complete and effectual weapon with which any constitution can arm the immediate representatives of the people for obtaining a redress of every grievance and for carrying into effect every just and salutary measure. Okay, so they held the purse strings. Okay. Now, they were able to check overgrown prerogatives. There was a slowing effect by making it go through the more popular branch. Okay, now moving on here. Now, so we went out of order. We did Clause 1, or Clause 2, now Clause 1. Now here we're going to do Clause 3. This is the one I was saying is really interesting. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. Every order, resolution, or vote to which the concurrence of the Senate and House of Representatives may be necessary, except on a question of adjournment, shall be presented to the President of the United States, and before the same shall take effect, shall be approved by him, or being disapproved by him, shall be repassed by 2/3 of the Senate and the House of Representatives, according to the rules and limitations prescribed in the case of a bill, which is Clause 2. So basically, they're saying if you want to call it an order, you want to call it a resolution or a vote or a concurrence or whatever you want to call it, you cannot use renaming some new process to bypass the approved of process. Everything still has to go through the standard voting So this is James Madison came up with this because he knew that power tempts people to want to invent new processes, to be the heroes, to do something necessary because their judgment is so good that everybody needs to just let them do it, right? And he says, no, that's not the way this system is getting set up. So here's one thing he said: if the negative of the president was confined to bills, it would be evaded by acts under the form and name of resolutions or votes. So the key word here is evasion. He's basically saying, don't evade this process. This is the approved of process. Okay. And basically, the accumulation of all powers in the same hands may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. That is what's happened with our administrative agencies, which President Benson has unequivocally declared unconstitutional. So they exercise all these powers. And so that's something that has to get fixed. All right. Again, these notes you're seeing here, by the way, whenever I put notes like this, those are AI answers that I find sufficient for my needs. Okay. I am picky about the answers I take from AI. And whenever I question them, a lot of times I'll say, hey, what did Madison say about this? Okay, what's the quote? And then I'll say, okay, where can I find the full context? Is this part of such and such Federalist paper? Is this part of such and such letter? Or what did Jefferson say? And I do go and I look up the whole thing in context. So this isn't me being lazy. Just sometimes I find that AI answers are straight up sufficient enough to copy and paste. And so here they are. Inventing new forms of legislation to bypass procedure is prohibited. Another one, they said they didn't want to be abused for bypassing. And the Supreme Court, which doesn't have the authority to grant this power, has at times said it anyhow that you can exercise powers beyond those authorized to Congress in the treaty power. That's not true. And that was one concern that the founders had. So, but the Supreme Court doesn't technically have the power to grant new powers to Congress, so, or the president or anybody else. Okay, so read the actual Constitution. Dallin H has pointed out we have the oldest written Constitution in effect right now. It's a written, keyword being written, okay? So we are a government of laws, not of men. That's the fifth principle that Dallin H uses in his talk, and we'll cover that here in a second. There is no, so this is John Adams, and then Alexander Hamilton said, there is no position which depends on clearer principles than that every act of a delegated authority contrary to the commission under which it is exercised is void. No legislative act, therefore, contrary to the Constitution, can be valid. George Washington, who said, let there be no usurpation, also said, the basis of our political systems is the right of the people to make and to alter their constitutions of government. But the Constitution, which at any time exists, till changed by an explicit and authentic act of the whole people, Article 5, by the way, is sacredly obligatory upon all. The very idea of the power and the right of the people to establish government presupposes the duty of every individual to obey the established government. Thomas Jefferson said, all authority belongs to the people. In questions of power, let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief with the chains of the Constitution. The written Constitution, keyword being there again. Okay, and I've already made a video showing statements from Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Ezra Taft Benson, and Dallin H. Oaks that administrative agencies and the Supreme Court have no constitutionally provided legislative process and should not attempt to create laws that are binding on the people and or government officials. Okay, so there's the title of my video. It's called Article 1, Section 1, All Legislative Power, Supreme Law of the Land. Okay. President Oaks, this is his fifth principle from defending our divinely inspired Constitution. Fifth and finally, I see divine inspiration in the vital purpose of the entire Constitution, written Constitution, by the way, you guys. He points that out earlier in the talk. We are to be governed by law and not by individuals, and our loyalty is to the Constitution and its principles and processes, not to any office holder. Keyword we're covering here is the process, okay? So if there's no process in the Constitution for it, we're not loyal to it. In this way, all persons are to be equal before the law. These principles block the autocratic ambitions that have corrupted democracy in some countries. Go back and review the previous four principles. These principles block the autocratic ambitions that have corrupted democracy in some countries. By the way, autocratic means you take power unto yourself that isn't written into the Constitution, right? You say, oh, it needs to be done, and I'm the one to do it, so I'm going to go ahead and take it. That's autocratic. And ambitions, of course, meaning you're going to hunt for any of those kind of excuses anyhow because you like power, but it's besides the point. Anything autocratic is not permitted in the Constitution. So John Marshall, when he said somebody needs to say what the law is, that's fine. Go ahead and call for an amendment. But in the meantime, you can't claim that power to yourself. That's called autocratic behavior. They also mean that none of the three branches of government should be dominant over the other branches to prevent the others from performing their proper constitutional functions, to check one another. I'm going to recommend, by the way, go back and read Madison, Federalist, oh my goodness, 52, 48, something like that. Anyhow, where he talks about the checks and balances. And even better, I would recommend reading Thomas Jefferson's letter to Abigail Adams, where he says, none of the branches are permitted in the Constitution to make an interpretation of the Constitution that's binding on the other branches. All their oaths are to the Constitution itself, to the text of the Constitution itself. So we've kind of flipped that philosophy around nowadays, but I'd look that up. Okay. Additional wisdom from James Madison: it will be of little avail to the people if the laws are so voluminous that they cannot be read, or so incoherent that they cannot be understood. So there was never an intention for bills to be so massive and cover so many powers that aren't in the Constitution that we the people wouldn't know what our actual government is. And additional founder wisdom: in his old age, Thomas Jefferson, who was a strict textualist, argued that not leaving on the books too long without reviewing and updating them to fit contemporary circumstances. He thought you needed to be updating the Constitution, or the laws at least, on a regular basis, double checking and making sure that they're still relevant, as opposed to just letting them sit on the books and then the next one's on the books until it's accumulating, right? He says, I am not an advocate for frequent changes in laws and constitutions, but laws and institutions must go hand in hand with the progress of the human mind. As that becomes more developed, more enlightened, as new discoveries are made, new truths discovered, and manners and opinions change, with the change of circumstances, institutions must advance also to keep pace with the times. We might as well require a man to wear a still the coat which fitted him when he was a boy, as civilized society to remain ever under the regimen of their barbarous ancestors. That's an interesting quote. So we probably ought to be careful about letting too many laws accumulate to where the laws are unknowable to the people. Okay, so please like and subscribe. I'm committed to continue to be very diligent in trying to share the best content on the topic of the Constitution and the proper role of government.